ESPN experts have ranked the Chargers as the 7th best roster in the NFL, and on today's show, we're going to be getting into the strongest and weakest position groups on the team.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 7 seasons, but this is our 5th season as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen today, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Today, we are going to get into an ESPN article that chose the Chargers to be in the top 10 best rosters in the NFL. We're also going to get into the strongest and weakest position groups and get into some X factors to finish this thing up.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of different ways it could go. I actually disagree. I think we both do with who they picked as the strongest roster, but this is done by Seth Walder and Mike Clay, 2 ESPN experts, 2 NFL experts that really do a lot of deep diving, and you can tell why they went the way they did for this show, because if they are talking about the best rosters, it's hard to stack. You have to know so much. You have to know everyone's backups. So I was a little surprised that they ranked the Chargers as the 7th best roster in the NFL. They trail only the Chiefs, Eagles, Bills, Dolphins, Bengals, and Cowboys, which means they have a better roster than the San Francisco 49ers, right? That's a take for sure. I mean, that's a little bit surprising there. But David, do you think that is deserving? Is this where they should be? Do you think they're right around the 7th and just in the top 10, generally speaking?
I do believe that they should be in the top 10. I think 7 or 8 is probably where I have them at, just considering the top end talent that this team has. I mean, you take their probably 10 to 12, top position players. I mean, I think that you'd be hard pressed to find another team that wouldn't take those type of building block type of players. And so I think that's why, you look at, all of the elements that you want to have a successful franchise, a successful football team, a quarterback, Chargers got it. Pass rushers, the Chargers got it. Weapons for that quarterback to throw the football to, the Chargers got it. An offensive line to protect your superstar quarterback, the Chargers got it. On defense, there's so much talent up and down this roster. So yes, I do believe the Chargers do belong in the top 10.
Yeah, if you wanted to swap them with the 49ers, I would get it. If you wanted to swap the Chargers with the Cowboys, I would get it. So I think this is around the tier where they are, right? I mean, it's interesting, though, because the Chiefs ranked as the 19th best offensive arsenal, and we did that show from ESPN. And then this one, right, you have them as the first-ranked roster. So obviously there's some disparity there as far as what the Chiefs have going on. But the Chargers come in at 7, right? They're the 5th team in the AFC, which just shows you, the 5 of the top 7 teams are all in the AFC because it's just a loaded conference going into the season.
It is.
But it was interesting who they picked for the strongest unit, David, because me and you both disagree, and we're going to be doing a position group breakdown of the group we believe it is next week. But it's hard to argue too hard with the guys they have at the top of the position they picked. They picked edge rusher because of Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. And I get that, David, but it wouldn't be where I would go with it.
Yeah, it's not where I would go either. And trust me, I get it. I totally understand. I mean, you see those top 2 guys, Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, and what they've done in their careers. I mean, it's very, very impressive. Khalil Mack is probably a future Hall of Famer. Joey Bosa, if he racks up a couple of more good seasons, he will be in that conversation as well. But I think where these 2 position groups differ, and the one I'm talking about is wide receiver, it has to do with the depth at that position, Daniel. I think last year when Joey Bosa got hurt, the Chargers could not find somebody to help replace that production. And I think this year, with the wide receiver room, it's so much more. There's so much more depth there. It's a much longer unit. So I feel like there are guys, if your top 2 guys, Keenan and Mike, do go out with an injury, you feel at least that Josh Palmer can come in and provide some adequate production for you, and the Chargers simply could not find that in the edge group. So I feel like that's still the case just because there's still some uncertainty there, and that's why I believe the wide receiver room is probably the strongest unit on this team.
I would agree. I mean, I think, there's definitely a space between Mike Williams and Keenan Allen and Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, all things, being equal and everyone's healthy. I think, two of those guys have been either the best at that position or top 5 at that position. Mike Williams never been top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, right?
That's fair.
So I think that it is the depth that makes the difference. This is their argument for the edge unit. Edge rusher Joey Bosa was limited to 2 full games during an injury-plagued 2022 season, but he was a superstar during his first 6 seasons, 58 sacks, and is at the prime age of 27. Opposite of him will be the league's best edge rusher of the last decade, Khalil Mack. Mack is now 32 years old, but remained effective last season, played 82% of the snaps, and had 8 sacks. And they also brought in versatile second-round rookie Tuli Tuipulotu, who brings some much-needed depth. And that's great, right? Like, having Tuli definitely helps that group. I think we're both bullish on Tuli, and we liked the pick when they took him in the second round, especially with how quickly the edge rushers were going on draft day, right? But
definitely.
Those are the only 3 guys you feel good about. And it's different because the wide receivers, you use more guys. There's 3 wide receivers on the field more often. There's 3 edge rushers, obviously, right? So when you look at it, though, there's 4 proven players to me in the wide receiver room. You have 2, borderline kind of star players in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Yeah. And then you have 2 guys who are proven to some extent with Josh Palmer and even Jalen Guyton, right? At least he's a veteran that we've seen have success. Like, definitely. Jalen Guyton is more trustworthy than Chris Rumph, right? Josh Palmer is more trustworthy in my mind than Chris Rumph is, right? Tuli could end up being better than Josh Palmer, sure. But, as far as the guys we know about, it's them versus, Chris Rumph in this scenario because the Chargers don't have Kyle Van Noy to be that kind of veteran at that, edge group this year. So that's where I think the difference is. And, if you're feeling really good about having a second-round pick as depth, I mean, then you look at the receiver core, and the one not proven guy that you have, or one of the 2, is Quentin Johnston, who's a first-round pick. Right. Yeah. So, if you're talking about what kind of expectations they're going to have or what kind of contributions you can get from them, I think that is what makes the difference. I think when you look at this wide receiving core, David, we're going to elaborate on it a little bit more next week, but it's long and it's well-rounded. And to me, that's what really makes the difference. Like Chris Rumph, I thought had some moments in pass rushing, still total liability in run defense,
so close, so many different times for Chris Rumph.
But he's not a super well-rounded player at this point in his career. He was a very poor run defender last year. Whereas the wide receiver room, it feels like a lot of the things you could want from that room, you have in that room if you need it.
That's exactly right. And I think just every different type of wide receiver that you want, you have available to you. I mean, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more next week, but it's you have the jump ball guy, you have the route runner, you have a solid pro, and you have some speed. Like, you just have all of the elements that you want. And in any way you need to attack an opposing defense, you are able to attack an opposing defense. That's what makes that so diverse. And it's just with Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, obviously they're great. I mean, if they're on the football field, they are true difference makers, both of them. But Chris Rumph, he just hasn't shown enough yet to where if one of those 2 guys goes down and he has to play a lot of snaps like he had to do last year, the production was not there. So I think that's why for us, it just feels like the wide receiver room is a place that is a stronger unit than the edge rushers. I understand the top end talent, but even with Tuli, and you said we both like Tuli, but we haven't even seen him on the football field yet. Yeah. He hasn't even got to training camp. We haven't seen him in pads at all. So that jury is still out on how he's going to be able to perform, although we do like the skill set.
Yeah, of course. The dude had 13.5 sacks last year, and he actually comes up in another part of this article as the non-starters that you should know, and we'll talk about that later on. But I do think as far as this group, you have 2 star players in each group. It's not an equal, but one group has 2 proven players behind those 2 stars and a first-round pick, and one has no proven players behind their 2 stars and a second-round pick. So that's it. That, to me, is what makes this wide receiving core the strongest unit on this team. Maybe it's just Justin Herbert by himself because he is just that good. But really though, if you're talking about the whole unit, not just the top 2 guys, not just the top few guys, it's the wide receiving core. And I think that's for me one of the easiest decisions on this roster because I'm very, very high on what this unit could be because they are more. It's more stable, it feels like, going in. It's more well-rounded, and I'm really excited to see it, and I'm excited to talk about it because this is a great primer because we will be starting our position group breakdowns, including the wide receivers, next Wednesday, where we get into why this group should be special. But what about the weakest group on this roster? This is one where I think we probably agree with Mike Clay and Seth Walder because they picked the defensive line. But what if there's another position that can maybe give it a run for its money? We're going to talk about that coming up right after this. I do first need to tell you guys, though, about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Take your first swing at MLB, betting on the MLB on FanDuel, and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Baseball, Padres are heating up again. I don't know if you should trust it, but they have a lot of fun bets on there. Also have all the All-Star festivities coming up, which will be fun, like the Home Run Derby and all of that. And you can all bet on all of that all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. And I know it's not football betting, right? But like one thing that makes baseball a lot more interesting is if you have something riding on it. I can tell you that from experience, and there's no better place to bet on the MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get a $200 back in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, well, let's get back to this ESPN article here ranking the best rosters in the NFL, and the Chargers come in at 7th, but obviously your team is only as good as their weakest link. So when you're looking at this team and you're trying to decide what the weakest position group is, I think that there's a couple different ways you could go with it, but I don't have a huge problem with where they ended up going. This is what they ended up saying. They said the weakest unit on this team is the interior defensive line, and this is what they said. While the edge room looks great, the interior line remains shaky. You have Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, and Morgan Fox are all back from 2022's underwhelming unit, with the top depth additions to the group being a 33-year-old Nick Williams and 6th-round pick Scott Matlock. The Chargers allowed a league-worst 5.6 yards per carry to running backs and were last in rush EPA last season. Things may not improve much in 2023. So, David, I mean, the wide receiver one I felt strong about. There's another way you could go with this that we'll get to, but I understand why they picked this unit.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand it, but also let's not sit here and say that the defensive line was the only reason why the Chargers defense gave up 5.6 yards per carry.
100%. I have that too. Is it fair to blame the run defense all on them? It's not.
No, it's definitely not. The corners on the outside, the guys who had that outside contain, which the Chargers gave up pretty much. Yep, the edge rusher contain. Yeah, I mean, they gave up the most outside yards than anyone in the NFL last year, and it was insane. It wasn't even close, and that was a large reason why they were, as bad as historically bad against the run as they were. But yeah, the defensive line, they're not absolved of all blame either. I mean, I think that
when it's more than just the run defense that you're worried about, right?
Yeah,
that's only one part of being a defensive interior lineman.
That's right, and then the other part of it is pass rushing, and the only person on that defensive line that provided any kind of significant pass rush was Morgan Fox. The guy had 6.5 sacks. Outside of that, and you spent big money on your defensive line going into this season. Let's not forget, Austin Johnson and Sebastian Joseph Day basically both made $10 million per season when they brought them in and signed them up. And so they were expecting big things from them. Namely, most importantly, to at least get some kind of handle on stopping the run. That did not happen at all. Right. And they weren't the only reasons for that, but they do definitely share some blame.
Yeah, I mean, they might not even have been the biggest part, right? But they were still a part of it. So, from that point, I get it. I mean, just to use that as an all-encompassing, the run defense was bad because of this. And we talked to Braden Fehoko about it. Every day, remember, we had Braden Fehoko, who was great when he came on with us.
Amazing interview.
And told us about run fits, right? And it does have the edge contain has a lot to do with it. It does have, the defensive backs coming up and making tackles has a lot to do with it. Not just that, but being in the right spot, right? So they don't.
Everybody's got to be synced up.
Oh, for sure. And let's talk about the linebackers, right? Obviously, the Chargers weren't getting enough in the run game with their linebackers and being able to stop it consistently, being able to find the right gaps and shut these plays down before they turn into big plays. That's the biggest thing. You look at a lot of those big runs they gave up, almost all of them are on the perimeter, right? Were they still a little bit weak inside? Sure. Did you get enough out of Sebastian Joseph Day? No. Did you get enough out of Austin Johnson? No, but it wasn't really his fault, right? That part too. But maybe truly helps this group, right? It seems like they're going to need him just as an edge rusher, but obviously he has a lot of experience rushing on the inside. I'm very high on Scott Matlock and what his potential could be eventually, but asking him to be the second best interior pass rusher on this team is just a really unrealistic thing, even for a guy who snatches souls, you know what I mean? So, it's hard with this group, and I think the other thing is just, this is one of the only group on the Chargers defense, David, where you don't have a star. There's no star of this group. I love Morgan Fox. There's no stars in this group.
No, there is definitely not. I mean, One thing that there is, though, is a ton of bodies. So
The bottom end, yeah.
right. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are fighting for the back end of that rotation. But, simply put, the Chargers need more from the guys that they paid a lot of money to. I mean, they need Sebastian Joseph-Day to show up and really provide his best game and to be able to provide a little bit of pass rush. And
yeah, you don't have to be a good pass rusher, but you can't be like one of the worst pass rushers, right? And that's kind of what he was last year on a snap-to-snap basis.
Right, you got to provide something, and then hopefully Austin Johnson comes back and he's healthy and he can go back to doing his thing. And then also Otito, right? I think we saw some good things from Otito Ogbonnia before he got hurt. Some flashes, some things that made you say, okay, I understand why.
It looked like he belonged.
Chargers. Yeah, exactly. He looked like he fit in. So, I mean, there's some questions about how they're going to be able to come back, and then they're going to have to see who's able to round out. But they need better production from that group, that's for sure. But I don't think it's the only position group that the Chargers need to be worrying about.
Yeah, I think you could go multiple spots. I feel like they're all on the defensive side, I mean, because I think if you're going offense, you probably go maybe running back. I don't know, like maybe you go like interior offensive line, but like you have dudes you feel really good about there, at least on the top end, right? So like, I think it's all defense pretty much. And I think the other one, it has to be safety to me. I think that would be the one you would probably go with just because it's like, yes, you have a star. Yeah. But is the star enough to carry the rest of that unit? Because the rest of the unit looks like this. It's Alohi Gilman starting next to Derwin James. It's JT Woods as basically the primary backup to both of those guys seemingly right now. And then it's Mark Webb, who hasn't been healthy in 2 years, and Raheem Lane, who, caught on as an undrafted free agent. So, you're one Derwin James injury away from this undoubtedly being the weakest part of your roster.
Yeah, and that's definitely scary, Daniel, because, I mean, hey, if DJ goes down, God forbid, and I'm not going to...
I mean, and nobody can replace him, right? It's just...
It's not even that, though. Right, and that's what I'm saying. It's not even about replacing him. Is you don't even have anybody that can come up and really play replacement value. And I'm not talking replacement Derwin James value. I'm talking replacement NFL type of level.
Or even has NFL snaps.
Yeah,
that's what. Yeah, barely, but that's it.
Right, and Raheem Lane, he 25 snaps last year. I mean, very, very little. I mean, Mark Webb has been injured, and then you have a couple of undrafted free agents that you're bringing into the mix. But it definitely just feels like a unit that could benefit from one more veteran type of presence that we keep banging the table for. But that's just what it feels like. I mean, you can't look at this roster and see a lot of places that you have a bunch of issues. But the safety position is one of those that makes you just go, man, I just hope DJ is able to stay healthy, because right now there's no one else behind him that you feel good enough that the Chargers won't get eviscerated on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, the Chargers haven't put a lot of resources into it since they took Nazir Adderley, right? They did a step in the right direction when they brought in JT Woods, but as far as outside sources, like they haven't brought in free agents to fill those spots, right? They've been really relying on just Nazir Adderley and Alohi Gilman getting them by last year, right? And it was just Nazir Adderley before that. So, that worries me. The amount of unproven depth at safety really, really worries me. Derwin James obviously lifts that unit. Maybe he's enough to get them out of it in this conversation.
I mean, DJ's Superman for sure, but I mean, I don't know how much you want to be tugging on Superman's cape, right?
Right, exactly. So it's just, it's tough. I wanted to see competition for Alohi Gilman, and JT Woods will bring that a little bit, and we'll get into our training camp battles in the next couple weeks too, where we, hash it all out. But this is, every day is no. We've been having this conversation about this unit for a little bit now, and we thought they would add to it, and they haven't. So we'll see how it all shakes out, but it just feels like it's a dangerously thin position right now. JT Woods, man, that dude, I mean, you talk about guys that, we'll have a lot of, we'll know a lot more about after this upcoming season, and even just after this upcoming training camp, man, that'll be like really the only kind of saving grace to see, where he's at.
It's a major training camp for him. I mean, after his first season, where I mean that was definitely not very fun to watch. Okay, no. I mean he was tackling his own guys in the preseason, and that kind of just gave you an idea of maybe he's not ready to step foot on the football field to play meaningful snaps. But this year, you got to hope that he rededicated himself. And by all accounts, the coach has said that he did improve his body. We're gonna have to see. I mean, because with JT Woods, it's all about the tackling. I mean, if he improves his tackling, he will be on the football field. Period. But that's what we have to see in training camp. It's going to be a big one for him.
because he had when he did get in limited snaps, like first of all, he missed 1 out of the 5 tackles that he had, I believe, or something around that. Had 1 missed 5 or made 5. So like a lot of those, he had some special teams tackles too. But like, I mean, Chris Rump missed more than half the tackles he had last year. So
yeah,
he's not the only one. It's been a team effort as far as the missed tackles go. But he could be a big X factor this season. But that's not who the ESPN experts picked as the Chargers X factor. They didn't pick a player at all. They picked Kellen Moore. And I have to agree to him, David, because as many good players as you have, the Chargers obviously have a loaded roster. You need the right guy pushing the buttons, and they think that he is. So we're going to talk about the X factor and also a non-starting player that you should know coming up right after this. All right, guys, we're continuing to get into this ESPN article from Mike Clay and Seth Walder going over the best rosters in the NFL, but that's just today's show. I will be on my honeymoon next week. David is going to be celebrating his 10-year anniversary with his lovely wife next week as well. We're doing this before the start of training camp, obviously on purpose. The great news is we're still having shows come out anyways. We will have 3 more shows for you guys next week before we ramp back up to 5 as things start to heat up in the offseason. But next week we'll be talking about undrafted free agent greats, including the GOAT, Antonio Gates. We'll also be getting into the wide receiving core and why we think that group is going to be special. But this article also had another little caveat as far as what they like about this team, and they had the X factor for 2023, which is interesting that they didn't pick someone that was actually on a roster on an article talking about the most loaded rosters in the NFL. But David, they ended up going with new offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. Maybe we're putting too much on him, right? Or expecting too much from him because we expect a lot, and we're very excited about the hire, but it's hard to say they got this part wrong. It does seem like he is one of the biggest X factors going into this year.
Well, and we've said it before, right? In an offseason where the resources that the Chargers had available to them was limited, they had to try to make or find their upgrades wherever they could. And one of those upgrades that they were able to pinpoint and locate that is not subject to the salary cap is bringing in a new offensive coordinator, and that being a guy in Kellen Moore who has had a track record of success every single year he has been an offensive coordinator. He has run a top 10 offensive unit. And I think it's pretty easy to say that he's coming into the best situation that he's ever had with the full complement of weapons, with the best quarterback that he has ever had, and with a very, very good good mix of offensive linemen that is going to be blocking in front of him. And I think this is what felt like was missing, especially with the offense last year with Joe Lombardi, feeling like that offense did not hit its peak and did not really produce at the level we were all expecting, given the talent. Now that job belongs to Kellen Moore to, like you said, be able to push the right buttons and to be able to maximize the potential, the massive potential of this offensive unit.
And Justin Herbert, right?
And Justin Herbert.
With Justin Herbert, I mean, everything with this team comes down to Justin Herbert.
That's right.
Like that is the main straw that stirs the drink. Like without Justin Herbert, you're doomed no matter what, right? That's just the life we're living in because you just can't replace him. But I think when you're looking at Kellen Moore, I want to go back to something you actually said because you talked about like, hey, the Chargers have very limited resources going into this. Like they couldn't improve their roster by going and signing a bunch of other players. They couldn't improve their offense by going and signing a bunch of players. They didn't. They signed Will Clapp, and re-signed Trey Pipkins. That's pretty much it offensively. So when you can't upgrade your roster, can't upgrade your offensive unit, what do you have to do? Try to get more out of the unit that you already have. And that's what the Chargers are doing with this move, right? They're trying to absolutely maximize what they have. And too often last year, too often even in 2021, when things got crazy, when the crunch time came, when the Chargers went up against a good defense, it fizzled out, truly, right? And like there were just too many times where it felt like the offense was holding the players back instead of getting the most out of its players.
That's right.
Here's this, though, Dave. What do you think about this? This is my X factor. I'm just came up with this right now.
Okay.
We want to talk about rosters and complete players. Tell me what you think about my X factor for this team. The return of Rashawn Slater. How do you feel about that as far as the X factor?
I love that. I absolutely love it. And hey, kudos to Jamari Sawyer and the way that he played last year, because there's no way that they make it to the playoffs without the way he played left tackle last year. I think that is a true and very clear statement. But to be able to introduce back into the fold an all-pro, and not just any all-pro, an all-pro left tackle, a guy who is dominant as a pass protector and as a run blocker, that has been sorely missed. Just to have that freedom to be able to say, Rashawn, I already know you got to, whoever is on your side, I don't got to worry about it. I know you don't need extra help. I know you don't want extra help. We're going to be able to divert our resources somewhere else. That type of freedom just by itself is beautiful. And I agree. I think he's one hell of an X factor, and the Chargers have definitely sorely missed him. And I can't wait to see number 70 go out there and just wreck shop once again.
Yeah, and I mean, this was just me trying to find a way to talk about Rashawn Slater. I'm excited to do the offensive line, position group breakdown. And he said, Kellen Moore might have the most, talent he has. I don't know. He's had some really, really good teams, right? He had Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup and CD Lamb all at the same time. He had one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. He had Tony Pollard, right? Like, he's had some guys for sure. But it's hard to say he's taking much of a step back. Right, and the other thing he didn't have with those guys is Justin Herbert. And Justin Herbert, to me,
that's what I was about to say.
Dak Prescott, right? So, in that regard, he should be really, really happy. And having his left tackle, his all-pro left tackle in the fold, only is going to help what his plans are for this offense.
Makes me sleep better at night, I'll tell you that right now.
Going down the field, that's what we want, right? It's harder to do when your left tackle's out. That should hopefully open
or
up
when you're
things.
running for your life. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And having a fully healthy Justin Herbert. Like, there's so many factors, but those two guys, hard to, argue that they're not X factors. But that wasn't the only thing they talked about in this ESPN article, because they also added a non-starter to know, and I like the one they picked. They picked edge rusher Tuli Tuipulotu. He recorded 13.5 sacks, is what they put a year ago, for USC, and could be a long-term replacement for Khalil Mack. That's the plan, David. I mean, that's what we're hoping he can be. It's hard, though. He will get snaps this year. It's not like some of the guys, right? It's hard to know how many snaps Deion Henley's going to get, or even Jordan McFadden, right? Someone like that.
Right.
He's at a position where they're going to need him to be part of that rotation. And I think, they're right to be bullish on him. I really like Tuli Tuipulotu, how he progresses, what the, maturation process looks like for him. It's so hard to say, because obviously we've seen with guys before, Drew Tranquil, because you're right. Chen Nwosu, right? Another USC edge rusher. Everyone goes at their own speed. This is a super young dude, but I'm excited to see his play style, and I definitely agree. He is a non-starter to know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Tuli Tuipulotu is a very important piece, and the Chargers were kind of backed into a corner to where they had to address the defensive end position. But I am glad that they went away with a guy that we were at one point looking at in the first round.
He was mocked to them, I think Todd McShay's first mock draft of the season. He was a first-round pick, right?
Yeah, so to get that guy in the second round, and a guy who, led all of the, FBS?
Pac-12, at least.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Led the Pac-12 in sacks with 13.5. I mean, that's a heck of a performance, and you hope that translates, but you just need more from that edge group. So you're hoping he can come in there and provide some solid run support and do what he does as a pass rusher.
Yeah, man. I mean, he definitely brings a frenetic energy. He brings a fun play style.
Yeah.
Of course, really good teams, you would like to let him cook. You'd like to, not have to rush him in there, but this is where the Chargers at, and he is going to be playing this year one way or another. It's really, really hard to see it, if he's healthy, that he's not going to be at least a pretty decent size role of this Chargers defense. And I'm excited to, talk about it. We'll break his game down a little bit more too when we get more of our player breakdowns and our position group breakdowns, right? As we kind of take things into the season and get into training camp. So much stuff to be excited about. But thank you guys for checking out today's show. We appreciate you, as always, making us your first listen. And thank you to Locked On Podcast Network for letting us do this and talk about our favorite team every day, because that's pretty cool too. And we'll be on vacation next week, but we will be back with you guys on Monday talking about undrafted greatness and the history of undrafted free agents with this Chargers franchise, including the GOAT, Antonio Gates, who needs no introduction. Excited to get into that, as well as the wide receivers next week, guys going into contract years. So much to get into, and we will have it for you guys next week. But until then, to make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel. And also go to find the show wherever you get your podcast from. Just because you do one doesn't mean you can't do the other. If you watch on YouTube, go subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcast from as well. It always helps us and helps us out, and we appreciate you guys. So you can also find us on all of our social media to make sure you don't miss the show. You can find me on Twitter at DanTalkSports and David Drogemeyer on Twitter at DroTalkSD. And you can also find us on Threads now, too. We're on Threads. Don't worry about that. But you can also find us at Locked On Chargers on Instagram and the Locked On Chargers Facebook page. But even from vacation, we will be back with you guys on Monday, and we can't wait because we have a lot of fun shows playing for you guys then. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.